Hello.
Hello.
Greetings.
Yes, we're back. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello, hello.
Yeah. Whee. Okay. Let me just make sure I can pull up what I want. Yeah. Okay. So a couple of weeks ago, we were dealing with messianism, right? And having seen a little bit about the suffering that Jews were going through in the time around 1492, it shouldn't surprise us that when we get to Tzfat in the early 16th century, and then later on extending into the 17th century, that we have many messianic dreams. The Lurianic Kabbalah, certainly has a lot of emphasis on tikkun, on repair, or repairing the flaws of the cosmos. Right? And so, if you can repair the really big flaws, then maybe you can bring about the time of the Messiah. That was obviously the goal of Rabbi Joseph de la Reina in the story that I told you. And he was not the only one who thought that you could do some redemptive act and bring about the coming of the Messiah. So here is an entry from a book by Chaim Vital, who was the chief disciple of Isaac Luria in Tzfat. He really authored all the books, almost all the books of the teachings of Luria. And in fact, scholars are not always clear how much of it is Luria and how much of it is Vital. But these are definitely from the mind of Vital. Okay? So he records this dream, which takes place in Kislev in the winter time, in the week of Vayishlach. Okay? And he interprets Vayishlach, where Jacob is attacked and wrestles all night long with this something, right? But he refers to that something with which Jacob wrestles as Samael, the evil force. Okay? And it mentions the chieftains of Esau, which also has some Kabbalistic significance, right? Some cosmic significance, right? And the portion from the prophets there is the vision of Ovadia. So there's also, a little bit of a heavenly vision, right? And so Vital has a dream in which he sees a large, high mountain, and he ascends on the eastern wall, and he asks, which city is this? They say, this is Nineveh, right? And then they tell him, this is the evil Rome. And being a dream, this has some good symbolism in it. We'll talk about what the symbolism is, right? But this is all about the evil powers that exist, let's say with Esau or with the chieftains of Esau. Esau was associated with the Christian world. And so, of course, the Christian world was the world that did terrible evil to the Jewish people in that time. Relatively speaking, life among the Muslims was pretty good compared to all the things that had happened, especially in the Iberian Peninsula. Right? And the vision of Obadiah, right? It's a prophecy concerning Edom, right? And so in his dream, he sees himself, climbing the walls of Rome. Right? I mentioned in my book that there was another messianic figure, a Marano by the name of Solomon Malcho, who in 1532 had tried to go to Rome and convince the Pope to convert to Judaism. Right? How's that for chutzpah? Right? Well, unfortunately, it didn't work very well for Solomon Malcho. He was burned at the stake in Rome. Right? But he was really trying to bring about, a cosmic shift for the Jewish people. Okay, so here's Vital's dream. He sees this lance stuck in the wall, a sword upside down, its edge down. Right? And they tell him this sword is stuck in this lance from the time of creation. Right? So he takes possession of this sword. He took it in his hand, right? And the emperor of Rome was told that sword is now in the hand of a certain Jew. So the emperor ordered them to look for him and kill him, and he threw the sword into the city, and its tip stuck in the ground in one of the city's courtyards. He escaped and hid in a cave in Rome, and then there until Shabbat afternoon. Then he came out, and the emperor's servants found me and brought me to him. Okay? This business about hiding in a cave is reminiscent of the story in the Talmud about Shimon Bar Yochai, who hides from the Romans, hides in a cave for years and years. Right? He hides among the poor. Talmud says the Messiah will be found among the beggars of Rome. Okay? So this is, chock full of messianic allusions. Okay? So eventually he's brought before the emperor, probably means the Pope. Okay? So the Pope basically says, remove everyone from here. Do you remember those words in the Bible? Anybody know where those words come from? Who says remove everyone from here? Nobody remembers. Those are the words of Joseph when he reveals himself to his brothers. Right? He says, okay, all the courtiers, all the members of the court, everybody leave and leave me alone with my brothers. And so it's like the Pope is going to tell him, that I am your brother. Right? So, but the emperor, he can't reveal his secret yet. Right? But he said, Vital tells him, all of you go astray in your religion. The only true Torah is the Torah of Moses. And the emperor in his dream says to him, I know that. That's why I sent for you. No one is as wise and knowledgeable as you are in the true wisdom, right? This is Vital dreaming of being told that he's the wisest and most knowledgeable Kabbalist of them all. That's pretty chutzpahdik too, okay? But, if you're looking to bring the Messiah, you got to have chutzpah. So the emperor asked him to tell him some of the secrets of the Torah and the names of God, and don't be afraid that I sought you because I truly love you. And so he relates to him some of this wisdom, and then he wakes up. Okay. Also this line, it says, I know there is no one as wise and knowledgeable as you are. Right? Remember, that's what Pharaoh said to Joseph when he brought him in to interpret the dreams. I know there is no one as wise as you. Right? And so Vital gives him some of the Kabbalistic wisdom. Now, the fact is, Vital, as well as Luria, lived in the land of Israel. They weren't in exile, actually, but they experienced Jewish life in that time as being in exile. And, if the Shekhinah is in exile, then we're all in exile. It doesn't matter where we live. Because if the Shekhinah is in exile, well, that's the overriding truth, regardless of where we happen to be settled. Right? And, of course, Samael, remember we talked about him at the beginning of this text, right? He's the personification of evil. He's the chief demon. He has to be destroyed in order for the Messiah to come to power. Other religions have to be shown to be false. That's the belief of Vital and of most Kabbalists, right? So for instance, Moshe Cordovero, who also lived in Tzfat, taught that, by Kabbalistic worship, that, the humiliation of the rule of the Gentile will end, their rule will be overthrown, that there are two systems in the world. One of them is holy and one of them is profane. Guess which one is holy? The Jewish one, of course, right? But you all knew that, right? So that's Cordovero. Even though the Jews rejected Jesus, there were traditions that the Messiah would come from Galilee, as did Jesus, right? And, Tzfat is in the Galilee. So maybe the Messiah will come from there, says Vital, who lives in Tzfat. Right? So, but the idea that the Messiah would come from there certainly adds to the emphasis on the mission of the Kabbalists of Tzfat, who are really trying to change the world radically. Right? And then, there's also a story about the birth of Luria, right? It says that the prophet Elijah appeared at the circumcision of Luria, and that by the time the child was taken home, presumably from the synagogue where the brit took place, right, he was already healed. by the time they got home. So, Luria is seen in that way as not a normal person. Right? He's messianic. So that's how the Kabbalists of Tzfat may have thought of Luria, and that's how Vital thinks of himself as the inheritor of the wisdom of Luria. Now, we don't know for sure, but we can surmise that some of the impetus behind this is the terrible pain that is going on in the Jewish world in the period from 1492 and forward. All the terrible things that were meted out to the Jews at the end of the 15th century. We're not sure how much more intense this feeling was in the 16th century than it was in the 13th century when the Zohar was written, or when Abraham Abulafia similarly went to the Pope to try to convert him to Judaism. You may remember, because we talked about this many months ago, Abulafia lucked out because the Pope put him in jail, but the Pope died. And so everybody was released from jail. And Abulafia went back to Spain, I guess. Whatever the reasons for it, there's definitely a lot more energy around the idea of the coming of the Messiah at this time. Because a lot of people believe, well, if the Messiah is going to come, this would be a really good time for it to happen. Things are just so bad for so many of us. And there's been, so many Jews who were killed or who were forced to convert to Christianity. Be a really, really good time for the Messiah to show up. So, the Messiah, is the one who does not come. But people are not necessarily convinced of that. And sometimes people will be more easily convinced that the Messiah is here. It doesn't always take that much to convince many people that there are certain charismatic leaders who either serve as the Messiah or bring about a messianic time in one way or another. And so it happened in the 17th century for the Jews. Let me take questions and comments before we go into the next text. Yes, Lou.
This story about Elijah being present at Luria's bris, is that the origin of Elijah coming to redeem, or is it?
No. But that earlier tradition led to certain speculation about the special nature of Luria. But the idea of it had existed a long time before. It's found in the Talmud, it's found in Midrashim. Okay. Other questions or comments here? Okay. Failing that, let me say a few words about Shabtai Tzvi. All right. The false Messiah in the middle of the 17th century. Shabtai Tzvi was a very charismatic individual. He was also mentally unstable. He has this name, Shabtai, all right, Shabtai has two connotations. One is Shabbat, the other is the planet Shabtai, or Saturn. He's a very Saturnine individual. Okay? And he tends to wander about, especially in Turkey, which I believe is where he was born. And at a certain point, he proclaims himself to be the Messiah. At that point, he doesn't get a lot of attention because the people who know him best seem to understand that he's just, he's not a stable individual. But then along comes a fellow named Nathan from Gaza. And Nathan of Gaza in 1665 joins forces with Shabtai Tzvi. And that's when people begin to pay serious attention to this so-called Messiah. And within a few months, Jews all over the world, the word has spread, and people are just caught up in the idea that the Messiah has showed up. Right? And Shabtai Tzvi was accepted as the Messiah, and Nathan of Gaza was accepted as his prophet. And it got a little difficult to oppose the notion, at least publicly, that Shabtai Tzvi was the Messiah, because the believers would do bad things to you if you contradicted them. Right? And so the ones who did oppose him were not very effective. Right? And so you have people from as far away as Amsterdam who are selling their property, packing their bags, because they believe that at any moment the Messiah will bring them back to Jerusalem, because that's what messiahs do, right? They bring all the exiles back, right? So Nathan develops this theology using ideas from Lurianic Kabbalah and justifying some rather bizarre actions that Shabtai Tzvi had taken place. So had taken. So, for instance, Shabtai Tzvi declared himself to be married to the Torah. Right? Conducted a wedding ceremony. Right? Shabtai Tzvi's sexual inclinations are also not too clear. He has a marriage with one of his believers, a woman named Sarah. It's not clear that that marriage was actually consummated.
Now things are getting weird.
Oh, there is nothing that is not weird about Shabtai Tzvi. By the way, the standard biography, although there have been, some other updates in scholarship since then, but the standard biography of Shabtai Tzvi was written by the great scholar of Jewish mysticism, Gershom Scholem. In English translation, it's about 1,000 pages. So if you really want to wade through it, it's fascinating stuff. But be prepared for a long read, right? Eventually what happens is that Shabtai Tzvi is taken into custody by the Sultan of the Islamic empire, the Turkish empire, right? And ultimately, the Sultan gives him a choice. He says, you can keep up this stuff, and I'm going to cut off your head. Or you can convert to Islam, and you can live in, at the patronage of my realm, right? we'll give you a place to live and we'll keep you here as part of the royal court. So Shabtai Tzvi, guess what? Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah, converts to Islam. Shocker to the Jewish people, right? And this too is justified by Nathan as a descent into the klipot, the shards of evil that were created at the beginning of creation when the holy sparks could not be held in the realms of light, and they shattered and they fell all over. So Nathan says, oh, Shabtai Tzvi has to descend into the realm of evil in order to lift up those shards of evil, those shards of light, and restore them to their place from out of the realms of evil. And only then can he bring about the ultimate redemption. And what happens is thousands of Jews follow him by converting into Islam. And they form a sect of Islam, which the Jews then called the Donmeh. Donmeh literally means the turncoats, right? That's what the Jews called these people, the Donmeh. And so this was a rather disturbing development, all in all, for the Jewish people. Now, one other historical thing you should know, and that is that this happening in the 1650s and 60s followed a major crisis for Eastern European Jewry. And that was the Cossack massacres of 1648. How much Sabbateanism was a direct result of that crisis, we can't say. It may have been some, it may not have been a lot. Another force that may have contributed to this is that over the 16th and early 17th century, there were many Marranos who, after living as secret Jews, but publicly functioning as Christians for a century and a half, they are now beginning to re-enter Jewish life and Jewish community. But along with that, of course, they take with them some of the ideas that they had taken in living as Christians. Now, you can't live as Jews in private and Christians in public without taking in some Christian notions. And so that also may have been a factor that led to a stronger acceptance of the false Messiah. So we're going to take a look at a selection here from the writings of Nathan of Gaza. He may have written this under the influence of a vision, or he may have written it just to try to give support to his idea about the Messiah, which he attributes to an earlier imaginary authority, right? So the text he attributes to a non-existent Rabbi Abraham who lived in Germany in the 13th century. But this is actually the writing of Nathan of Gaza. Okay? So here is what he says. It says, I, Abraham, after having been shut up for 40 years, grieving over the power of the great dragon that lies in the midst of his rivers. How long until the end of these awful things? I mean, in other words, all bad things are happening even back then too, right? And the voice of my beloved knocked. That's sort of a verse from Song of Songs. Behold, a son shall be born to Mordecai Tzvi in the year 1626. He shall be called Shabtai Tzvi. He will subdue the great dragon, and that's a muted reference to Christianity, and take away the strength of the piercing serpent, the strength of the crooked serpent, and he will be the true Messiah. He will go forth to the war without hands, without weapons. His kingdom will be forevermore. There's no redeemer for Israel besides him. Stand on your feet and hear the power of this man, though he be poor and lean. Okay. He is my beloved, the apple of my eye and my very heart, and he shall sit on my throne, for the hand is the throne of God. And in this vision, a man stands before him, and with the brightness of fire all about him. He sort of modeled after the vision in the first chapter of Ezekiel. And he says, loose the knots of the demonic powers and make war, prepare a refuge, for there is no provision. A deep sleep falls upon him. And again, kind of a reference to Ezekiel, a horror of great darkness in all the land of Egypt. There came a ferret and a chameleon and brought forth a great light, the light of the hiding of his power. And behold, there was a man, and his size was 1 square cubit. His beard was a cubit long, and his penis a cubit and a span. Okay. He held a hammer in his hand and tore up a great mountain of 10 times 6 score thousand. And a man went up the mountain. There was a pit down to the bottom, and he fell in. And he said to me, do not grieve, for you shall see the power of this man. And again, the awesome man comes again and says, how great is your strength, since I reveal to you things unknown, even to the angels. And now write the vision and conceal it in an earthen vessel, so it may continue many days. In other words, all this will be rediscovered by Nathan of Gaza at the right time. Okay? And he will do wondrous and awesome things and give himself up to martyrdom to perform the will of the Creator. Okay? So there's all these powerful evil forces. And in order to defeat them, you need even more powerful forces, right? Meaning you need Kabbalah, magical Kabbalah, of course. Right? You need that information that is unknown even to the angels. And so there are references in here to Samael and Lilith, the leaders and rabbis of the generation, right? They're portrayed as also evil, right? Because they would rise up against Shabtai Tzvi. So they are referred to in, such nasty language. The sons of Lilith, the membrane upon the liver, which is a reference to the evil side. Okay. That's the view of Nathan of Gaza, and that's the role of the false Messiah, who ultimately dies in 1676, still under the protection of the Sultan. Comments or questions to hear? Yes, Lou.
Nathan follow Tzvi into Islam?
I don't believe that Nathan actually converted to Islam, but he was still Shabtai Tzvi's prophet, explaining why he did it. And so many people chose to follow him. My recollection is that Nathan of Gaza did not actually convert into Islam.
So Nathan was the PR agent.
Yes.
Would Tzvi's messianism spread without Nathan?
Probably would not have spread without an adequate spokesman. Now, could have been somebody else, but Nathan of Gaza was, as you say, the PR man. And apparently convinced thousands and thousands of Jews. So that's the saga of Shabtai Tzvi. Other questions or comments up here? All right, then. You may well be aware that messianism is a very important theme in the world of Chabad today. It's important in general in Hasidism, but not usually with the kind of force that it developed in Chabad. There's quite a range of opinion about messianism among Hasidic thinkers. But the first piece of evidence about messianism in the Hasidic world comes from a letter of the Baal Shem Tov, which describes a vision in which he encounters the Messiah. So the letter is written about the year 1751. Baal Shem Tov dies in 1760. So it's not clear exactly when this letter becomes public, but it eventually does. It is spread to Hasidim and a few non-Hasidim around the world. Here's what happens in this vision of the Baal Shem Tov. He says, I went higher step by step until I entered the palace of the Messiah, in which the Messiah studies the Torah together with all the Tanaim and the saints, and also the 7 shepherds. That's, a reference to all the shepherds in the Bible, Moses, David, the like. There I witnessed great rejoicing and could not fathom the reason for it. So I thought that God forbid the rejoicing was over my own departure from the world. But I was afterwards informed that I was not yet to die, since they took great delight on high, when through their Torah I perform unifications here below. In other words, the Baal Shem Tov was a little bit of a wonder worker himself. And what he's saying here is that everybody up there also approved of what he was doing down here. So to this day, he says, I am unaware of the reason for that rejoicing. I asked the Messiah, when will the Master come? I mean, that's the key question. If you could see the Messiah, if you could ask the Messiah one question, that's the question you'd want an answer to. No, when? When are you coming? And he replied, you will know of it in this way. It will be when your teaching becomes famous and revealed to the world. In other words, when your teaching, the Baal Shem Tov's teaching, becomes famous. And when what I have taught you and you have comprehended will spread, so that others too will be capable of performing unifications and having soul ascents as you do, or these, Kabbalistic rituals. Then will all the klipot, the shards of evil, be consumed, and it will be a time of grace and salvation. I was astonished to hear this and greatly distressed it would take such a long time. When will such a thing be possible? In other words, how will I get my teachings out across the entire Jewish world? I mean, the Baal Shem Tov lives in this corner of Poland, right? How's he going to get it all throughout the world? But my mind was set at rest, and I learned there 3 special charms and 3 holy names, easy to grasp and to expound. So I thought to myself, it is possible by this means for all my colleagues to attain to the stages and categories to which I have attained. That is to say, they too will be able to engage in a sense of the soul and learn to comprehend as I have done. In other words, now, I can't spread this wisdom alone by myself, but my disciples, they'll be able to do it much more quickly. He says, but no permission was given to me to reveal this secret for the rest of my life. Now, in another few weeks, we're going to talk about the Baal Shem Tov and his teachings and the Hasidic movement. This is one of the very few things we know of that was actually written by the Baal Shem Tov himself and not something that was written down by one of his disciples. It was given to one of his primary disciples to deliver to his brother-in-law, who at the time was in Palestine, and the disciple was traveling to Palestine. But it turns out that the guy had to cancel his trip to Palestine, and so the brother-in-law never actually saw the letter. It was published in 1771, which is over 10 years after the Baal Shem Tov dies. But apparently it was written in his hand. And they do have a few other things which were written in the handwriting of the Baal Shem Tov. So scholars are pretty certain that this was authentic to him. Okay? So there is some threat to the Jewish people. There's always something bad happening to the Jewish people in this period. And so, he has this mystical experience, very much like the old Hechalot mystical experiences, visiting the highest realms. Baal Shem Tov doesn't claim to be the Messiah. He just is saying, I got to visit with him. And this is what I learned, that the spread of my teachings will stimulate the final redemption. So the Baal Shem Tov himself has lots of emphasis on magic. He's a Baal Shem. What is a Baal Shem? Right? Someone who uses amulets that have the Shem, the divine name. Right? And because he writes very effective amulets, that's his reputation at any rate. So he's the Baal Shem Tov. He's a really good amulet writer. Okay? And so he's able to use the power of the names for those who are in need. Right? But he himself is not allowed to spread the knowledge of this magic to his disciples. And that would have helped him, bring about the redemption a lot quicker. But he's not allowed to do that. Right? So his role is just kind of preparatory to the Messiah, no more than that. There's no plan, there's no process. There's no specific time that the redemption is going to come about. You know, it may be that what he was really saying was, don't count on this happening anytime soon. All right? Saying, yes, it's going to happen. And it's going to happen when this other thing happens. But we have no idea when it's going to be. So don't think about it happening in your lifetime or anytime soon. And we don't know when things are going to get better for the Jews. Forget about that. Right? And you know, the effect of the false Messiah Shabtai Tzvi still reverberated here 100 years later. So it may be that if the Baal Shem Tov had said that the Messiah is going to come at a certain time, that people would have ridiculed him and claimed that this was sort of a Sabbatean-like teaching, right? So this is sort of a neutralization of messianism. And again, in most of Hasidism, messianism is portrayed on a fairly low level. You don't see a tremendous amount of pressure. You don't see in most Hasidic groups the kind of thing you're seeing in Chabad today, where they say, we want Mashiach now. And where the Rabbi in certain Chabad circles has been declared Hamelech HaMashiach, the King Messiah, right? That was certainly not true with most Hasidic groups. Comments or questions up to here? All right. Let's take a look at this next teaching, which is attributed to Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl, one of the early Hasidic rabbis, a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. And here is what he says in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. He says, every Jew must rectify and enhance the aspect of the full stature of the Messiah that is related to his own individual soul. Right? So what does this mean? I mean, in order to bring about the Messiah, it's a long, long process. But you are connected to that. It's like you're saying you have a certain gestalt, a certain way of being in your own soul, which relates to the Messiah. And you have to take that part within yourself and develop it in order to help bring the actual Messiah. Right? So he quotes the name Adam, Aleph Daled Mem, is the acronym of Adam, David, Mashiach. Adam, King David, the ancestor of the Messiah, and the Messiah himself. This is so because Adam's full stature, tradition to this effect, Adam's full stature extended from one end of the world to the other. Okay? And all Jewish souls are encompassed within that full stature of the first man. But afterwards, because of the sin in the Garden of Eden, his full stature was diminished. Similarly, the Messiah will possess the full stature of all Jewish souls. And therefore, every individual Jew must try to enhance the aspect of the Messiah related to his soul, so that the entire stature is rectified and established. In other words, the coming of the Messiah depends on you and me, right? We have to take that part of the Messiah that is inherent within our souls and develop it and nurture it and build it up, right? And maybe you will be the one who will finish the job, right? To reestablish this, this stature within Adam and bring about what he describes here at the end as the unending and general unity of souls. So it's not necessarily going to happen right away. But if we fulfill our responsibility, if we could, bring our aspects of our souls into the right place, we could make it happen. Right? So that's our task, to try to help push that along. Right? The idea of Adam extending from one end of the world to the other is something that comes from the Talmud. This acronym of Adam, as Adam, David, and Mashiach, that originates in the 13th century writings of the Kabbalist Moshe de Leon. It appears very frequently in the 17th century work Shnei Luchot HaBrit, which was required reading for all the Hasidic Rebbes. Probably was borrowed from that by the Baal Shem Tov and his students. 600,000, that's the number of adult male Jews who were believed to be present at Sinai. So that's a symbol for the entire Jewish people. Okay. Comments or questions up to here? Anybody want to volunteer to perfect the aspect of the Messiah within yourself? Lou, would you like to be the first to do that?
I don't think I'm qualified.
Oh, come on, Lou. You're a righteous person. You could do that. Sylvia, what about your messianic aspect? We don't have a very ambitious group here, I'm telling you. Rose, you need to unmute, Rose. Rose, I can't hear you. For some reason, your microphone's not picking you up. I'm not hearing you at all. I don't know how you adjust your microphone. So if you want to send me a note in the chat, I can read that and share it.
I texted her or I messaged her that we cannot hear you.
Yeah, I think maybe she can hear us. All right. We're just about at the end of our time, and no one has yet volunteered to help bring the Messiah.
Well, I'm usually not overly complimentary of the Reform movement, but I see bringing the Messiah as social justice, contribution to causes that we believe in and things like that.
Right.
I have a hard time thinking that, the Messiah is going to be dependent upon whether or not I keep kosher according to some strict definition that, even with the strictest of definitions, they don't agree. So I don't think my practice of ritual is not going to bring the Messiah.
Yeah, well, that's because your practice of ritual doesn't include Kabbalah. But
Granted.
if you started taking that on, Daniel, maybe you could get us there, right? You just have to perfect that aspect of the Messiah within yourself. I mean, keeping kosher and praying every day and putting on talis and tefillin and studying Torah and all that, that's only the beginning. That's small cheese compared to the Kabbalistic stuff and the proper intentions that go along with all that. So I'd have to agree with you that, all that stuff is not going to bring the coming of the Messiah. You have to go major league.
Yeah, I probably am not a good candidate to do that, unfortunately. Maybe, I don't know.
What can I say? The problem is that none of us are great candidates to do that. Okay? That's the
Well,
way it
I'm
goes.
not saying that these rituals are not important to Jewish identity and belief in God and things
Right.
like that. They're there.
Right.
I just
But
see the Messiah as something that people are going to build by justice and mercy.
Yes. Yes. So, yes, Lou.
So if I'm getting this right, Chabad thinks that it is up to us to bring the Messiah, as opposed to the Messiah coming just because, not just because, but because there's an overall need, and it's God says it's time.
Yeah, you have to keep adding mitzvot to the scorecard, so to speak. And that's why Chabad pushes some of the most basic mitzvot, which a lot of Jews don't keep, right? Lighting candles for women, wearing tefillin for men, right? Says there's, you don't know that maybe, you keep one Shabbat and that will put us over the top. Yes. Rose, try again. Okay, I'm not hearing you. We're going to have to stop here because we're at the end of our time. Rose, if you will, just send me an email with your thought or your question, and I'll get back to you. Okay. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
We'll see you back here next week.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.